possibly one divergence where I left the firm very quickly, and then the .com I started did not work out. My parents still told people I was a lawyer. Story. And so then I worked for another startup. Oliver actually saw me when I was working for one of these startups. It was like in Midtown, it was a healthcare software company. And then that company did not work out. And then I became the CEO of an education company that became number one in the US and was acquired by a public company in 2009. So at this point, things are, my parents started being honest about what I do for a living. And so this is really the great divergence, I think, from many of the people you know who worked in startups and were doing things. And part of it is that I still actually bore a grudge against the entire law school law firm thing. And I bore a grudge not even on my own behalf, but I bore a grudge on behalf of all the people that were still stuck. I was like, there's like this giant machine that's turning some of our smartest people into miserable drones. Again, no offense. But I'm someone who looks at it more as like a systems problem than an individual problem. You know what I mean? It's like the system. And I actually felt Davis Polk trying to turn me into something else, and I obviously didn't like it, and so I left. But there were many people that I worked with who were still doing that work, and so I thought, well, maybe if I can somehow improve the system, that would be great. And you can't be negative. You can't just be like, don't do that. Like, that's not very effective. So I thought, well, what would I want young people to do instead? And so the idea I came up with was, I think they should start businesses in Detroit, New Orleans, Baltimore, Cleveland. But I knew starting a business would be next to impossible for a 22-year-old coming out of school because, like I failed, like most people would fail. So then I thought, well, maybe I could plug them into an existing startup and have them learn and develop that way. It's like Teach for America for entrepreneurs. What do you call that? Venture for America. It's like, ooh, who's against Venture for America? That's like the most wholesome thing ever. You have to be a real asshole not to like Venture for America. So I think this is the great divergence. This was like I sold a company, I had a little money, and I thought, okay, if I spend 5 to 6 years trying to build this alternate path for young people, I think I can help create thousands of jobs. I think I can turn people in a very different direction. I think I can show how messed up our system is. I think I can try and create vitality in parts of the country that right now are experiencing a brain drain. And so I thought to myself, if I sign myself up for 5, 6, 7 years, because when you're an entrepreneur, you have to devote that amount of time. You don't know how long it's going to take. I think I can make something important happen. And so that's what I did. And I never thought that would lead me to run for president. But when you get out to these areas, and I talked to some of you who are from Michigan or New Hampshire, other parts. Raise your hand if you're from the Midwest. Let's try that. I know Oliver is. Ohio. Yeah, so if you're from the Midwest, Wisconsin, probably, right? Missouri.
Both.
So if you're from the Midwest, you saw or you know what I found out when I was running Venture for America, which is there's such a gulf between St. Louis and San Francisco or Michigan and Manhattan, where you make that trip and you're like, what the heck? Like you feel like you're in another dimension or era or country and not just a few time zones away. And some of you go home to visit your families, or there's like a wedding or like a special event or someone's dying or whatnot. And you go and then you get sort of brought back to the environment you grew up in, and then you come back here and then you wonder, it's like, what is real? I mean, they're both very real, it turns out. Actually, that's much more real by the numbers in terms of the frequency. Like, as you all know, most of America is much closer to St. Louis than San Francisco. San Francisco is like its own little thing. So I spent 7 years traveling the country experiencing this and coming back to Manhattan or San Francisco and just being like, like this is bigger and worse than anything I would have imagined. And certainly it also was bigger and worse on racial dimensions, on gender dimensions, because if you went and you found the startup entrepreneurs in Cincinnati, Ohio, they all looked sort of a certain way, you know what I mean? It's like the same is true in like other cities, and so you look at the startup ecosystems and they clearly don't represent a cross-section of American society at all. And Venture for America was recruiting relatively some problems, like sort of like that fell into certain patterns. And so I was doing this work for 7 years. Donald Trump becomes president in 2016, and that to me was a giant stop sign. It's a giant red flag saying, okay, you must examine what you're doing with your life. Because at this point, I was getting medals and awards and accolades, and a movie was getting made about my organization, being like, how'd you do it? Thumbs up. And then I was like, no, you don't get it. My work is like pouring water into a bathtub. There's a giant hole ripped in the bottom. It's like I've got a watering can being like, here's some water. And then people are like, nice job with that watering can. And you're like, no, the bathtub's like losing water in like this epic way, and it led to that guy becoming president, and it's like a disaster for so many of these communities. So that was 2016, 2017, where I thought our country has no understanding of what is happening to it. Like when Donald Trump became president, the media, and oh my gosh, don't get me started on the media, but the media like helps the guy get elected, and then it's like, oh, horrors, like he got elected. You know what I mean? And then after he gets elected, it's not like, oh, why did he get elected? Does that have something to do with the fact that we blasted away 4 million manufacturing jobs? Like, no, like that must not be it. Like, and then they go, like they're just so vapid and shallow, and part of it's the medium. It's like you've now seen me do like, you know, these little interviews and then like 2-hour conversations. And when you have these cable news segments, there's like a rhythm where it's like, you know, here's a clip of you talking. Here's a clip of someone else talking. What do you think about that? You have 60 seconds. If you talk for more than 60 seconds, I will cut you off. So then you just like talk for 60 seconds. The whole segment lasts 6 minutes, and then that's it. Like, you know, and that's what passes for political and public discourse at this point. So I saw this in 2017, and I was like, oh gosh, the country doesn't understand what's going on. We're scapegoating immigrants, something that's not an immigrant problem, it's a technology and automation problem. And so I made a list of things that I could do that could possibly get real solutions across the finish line in a 5 to 10 year period. And the list began and ended with run for president. So the big decision really was deciding to start Venture for America and then going down this road and seeing these problems. And like to me, now, the thing that I'm so thrilled about is that there's such a hunger for this conversation, for these principles, for this approach, for real solutions, for a different type of political discussion. I believed it because I thought to myself, there must be people like me, people like you all here in this room that have been fed up and have just thrown your hands up and said, you know, these politicians are out to lunch, they don't really understand what's going on in our economy, certainly not with technology. And I gotta say, the average politician's understanding of technology is essentially zero. Yeah. You know what I mean, you saw the hearings when Zuckerberg showed up and whatnot, and it was like, oh my god. And here's the horrifying thing, that shit was prepared. Well, think about it. They didn't just like spring the visit on him and be like, oh, what's the question we're going to ask Zuckerberg? It's more like, yeah, they had the staff be like, come up with the questions going to make me look the smartest. Oh, really? Like the Congress got rid of the Office of Technology Assessment 24 years ago. So they've been out to lunch. Great timing, right? It's like, there's a time to get rid of this. Let's get rid of it in 1995. So the average politician's understanding of technology is very, very low. And I knew that there had to be people like you all, people like me that wanted to have a different kind of conversation. So when I decided to run for president in 2017, I know, and I believed that we could get to this point. But it's certainly very invigorating to be at this point. And I'm going to fast forward a whole lot to last week and then the path ahead. So the debate was a lot of fun. How many of you all watched the debate? So that was a blast. It's been an incredible rush of support since then. I think we've raised something like 1.4 million during the days, like literally the day before the debate till now, which is a lot of money for us. And something like 87% of it was from new supporters.
Wow,
that's
awesome.
So we've woken up a whole sleeping giant in America. And when you look at our fundraising numbers and you see the proportion that come from small donors, which describes none of you, so thank you for none of you. Can't stand those small donors.
Live streaming this.
They know I'm kidding. But the vast majority of our donors are small donors. Like this sort of salon or event is actually not the primary driver of our finances. We'd like it to be a bigger driver of our finances. Really, just being practical. Because some of the campaigns we're competing against have salons like this, like on the super regular, like they'll have 6-7 a day and just like bang that out and just raise. I mean, that's how you raise that level of money in this race. But the great thing for us is that we're just growing and growing. We raised 1.7 million in Q1, 2.8 in Q2, and then now Q3, where we're already past 2 million, and so we're just going to end up rising. And just so for reference, like the O'Rourke campaign, I think raised like 3 million and change last quarter. And so we're gonna like pass them. We're like going in the opposite direction of some of the other campaigns. Now, yeah, it's very exciting. So some of the inside scoops, some of the fun stuff that happens in the debate stage or before and after. So one thing you might have noticed, there was a real difference between debate 1 and debate 2. Oh yeah. So part of it was that the moderators were, let's say, not eager to hear from me in debate 1. But there was also one thing that I haven't talked that much about, is that I was severely under the weather in debate 1. I'd actually had an IV that day, like I was very, very sick, and so it was not like it was not going to be like a joyous experience for me, regardless. And that's the kind of thing we didn't really talk to the press very much about. Because like no one wants to hear that shit. But I have to say, being healthy made such a difference. And so if I seemed like a different guy up there, it's like part of it was like like IV Andrew. And then number 2, it's like happy to be here, Andrew, like ready to go. So so debate 2 is going to be much more the norm. I'm happy to say, unless I get hit by like chemical warfare. Or 3-year-old kids or 6-year-old kids between now and September debate. So the second debate was I was healthier, like I had a much better sense of the environment. The moderators called on me more, and some of the inside scoop on the moderators too is that we had different instructions for debate 2. Is that they said that they saw debate 1 and they said we're not going to have anything like debate 1. So they were like, do not interrupt. And then raise your hand and get the moderator's attention, and then we promise we'll come to you. And they was like, we're going to be like very diligent traffic cops, and for the most part they were. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So from a viewing experience at home, you were like, oh, like number 1 sort of like chaos, and then number 2 looked very different. They're a little bit like mini elections, where each debate they kind of respond to the debate before. So debate 2 looked different, felt different, but it felt great for me. And during that debate, I could tell it was going well. And at the end of it, Joe Biden comes up to me and puts his arm around me and is like, what did he say to me? He was like, we need to talk about the 4th Industrial Revolution because, to me it's like a major problem. And I think that's progress. So the debate last week to me marked in many ways one of like the things that I'd set out to accomplish in this campaign, which was wake up America to the fact it's not immigrants, the fact that technology and automation is a major problem, and then wake up America to the fact that there are meaningful solutions that we could push across the finish line if we all were to get ourselves together. But I've gotten a lot greedier since and I also see the gulf between trying to initiate the conversation in the media and ramming it down their throats and making sure that we actually pass this thing. And this is a golden opportunity for us. This is an historic opportunity. We can do it. There's so much enthusiasm around this campaign, and there's so much mistrust and distrust of the media. Oh yeah. You know what I mean? Like everyone's now hungry. They say like, oh wow, we can make this thing happen. And the fun thing too is that some mainstream media is starting to convert. Like I spent a little bit of time with Anderson Cooper after the debate, and then now Anderson's having me on the show.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we can. It's a little bit like Inception. Like you're around people. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but Whoopi Goldberg's been like hitting. So the ideas are spreading. The ideas are very, very powerful, and we can make history in this election in part because there's such a distrust of the media. There's like a impatience with business as usual. There's a lack of trust in many politicians, unfortunately. Or it's just it is what it is. I'm seeing the same things you're seeing. So we have an historic chance to make this case and win. It's wild. Like we can win the whole thing. One of the things that happens, you all know this, when you meet someone, you actually get a sense of them. Like I've met the other candidates and we can beat them. history together. Would love to take questions from you all, but thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Yeah, so let's have some questions.
No, 20 minutes.
So, Julian, I've been reading some articles online, and people are kind of disagreeing with your point that you made on the debate about the climate change and how people should just move to higher ground. Obviously, I know that that's not your only solution, but so I just kind of wanted to ask, like, what have you thought to maybe address that more clearly so people aren't as confused? Or
You know what's hysterical is, like, I feel like prior to my debate comments, there were two positions on climate change. One, we have to fight climate change. Two, climate change is not real and is not a problem. And then now this third position, which is we're fucked. So in preparing for the debate, like, someone asked me my thoughts on climate change, and I had like a very establishment-y answer. I was like, are we going to the Paris Accords and like climate change, da, 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 da. And then they were like, you know, it's like, I feel like this answer is like the person who was like listening to this being like, I feel like you're like hiding something. I was like, actually, I think we're screwed and that we're like too late and that, you know, like the science says like, you know, we're like even the most pessimistic projections are like not actually like we're surpassing the most pessimistic projections, and that we keep fantasizing like we're going to somehow, you know, turn the thing all around, but only 15% of emissions, and the developing countries are just going to have cheaper source of energy that they're going to utilize, and unless we somehow made clean energy free to them, like there's no reason that they would convert. And so then the person listening to this was like, say that instead. And I was like, really? And he's like, oh yeah, it'll be much more interesting. So I shrugged and was like, all right, because I happen to believe it. Now, I think some people in the press have taken a hold of it and, you know, frankly caricatured my stance and statement. But the thing that I love about it is I think most people will realize the caricature immediately, because it's clear that I don't think climate change is a hoax or anything. You know what I mean? It's like, I actually think it's even worse than, you know, you think it is. You know? So clearly I would be for everything that tries to forestall it or like convert our energy consumption or reduce carbon. I'd obviously be all for that. And then I'd also be for giving poor people in America money so that they can try and you know, when the hurricane comes, they can get an actual automobile and, like, you know, leave instead of staying there and get swept underwater. So, like, I believe in everything other people believe in, plus I believe in trying to prepare our population. So that's the story that we need to get out. And I'm happy to say we're going to roll out a comprehensive climate change plan in the next week or so. And so right now we're letting the conversation bubble up because we kind of are enjoying it, frankly. And then we'll have like this comprehensive climate change plan. I'll be like, look, Yang believes in science. Yang wants to fight climate change. Shocker, you know.
So move the higher ground plan.
Maybe we should call it move the higher ground. Yeah. Well, you like that name? I produce memes without even knowing it. Like a meme fountain.
I have a question. So this vaccine topic is like super controversial. It's hard to even like bring it up to have a level-headed conversation, so all the extreme views can kind of come together and find some kind of level-headed, just even have a conversation. How are you gonna inspire a conversation so it's not so divisive? Because amongst moms in the house or dads in the house is like the moment, for example, the moment that you ask a question about, oh, the dosage or pacing of it. It's like, oh, are you anti-vax, right? And then it's, you know, Mary Williamson got into a lot of trouble because she's like, you know what, we should have better safety testing. And then everybody starts labeling her anti-vax. And it's just such a hard conversation. And I think it's symptomatic of a lot of other stuff going on in this country where people just instantly get divisive and categorize, and it's hard to have a conversation. You know?
Yeah, I think that's an experience I've had across many dimensions. Oh, you know, one thing that's quite similar is that I was asked about circumcision, and then I said, hey, you know, I don't think there's a really good medical case for it. I think it's getting pushed on parents in like unnecessary ways, and you know, we should examine that. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, dang, like the anti-circumcision campaign. And then I was like, what? But then I was happy to have that conversation. And you know what's funny is, like when I was on The View, like someone said, it's like, oh yeah, they push that circumcision stuff on you. It's like a lot of people actually had direct experiences in various ways. So I agree with you that there are certain issues that for whatever reason, if you touch them, there's like a huge set of conventional thinking, and then they'll like attack you if you seem to be going against the grain along those lines. And that's something that I would love to help change in this country. And that's something that, you know, I think it impacts us in many, many different respects. Certainly health and our children's health, foremost among them. I'll pick on someone in the back because I feel bad. Matt.
Yeah.
Andrew, what in your personal life do you wish you could show off to Americans or showcase to the American people to really show that you are the personality of American dream and you are what American citizens need for a ethical ethos and pathos served in the President of the United States?
So first, who else thinks Matt looks like Dermot Mulroney?
Yeah.
That's good. I was telling him. Anyway. I can't, like, that's actually a question that my team has been exploring very deeply right now. Because, so we've successfully introduced Andrew Yang to the American people as, you know, business casual, tech bro, Asian guy, sort of irreverent, pokes fun at me. It's like, that's like the image. You gotta get that image. And so now we're trying to broaden that and make it more three-dimensional and talk about the human side. So it's gonna be my family to some extent, personality, emotion. So we're trying to make me more three-dimensional.
What about your immigrant story?
Like
your
the
parents. Like your
immigrant
parents'
story,
immigrant
my parents' immigrant story. I really want to have video of me playing basketball because I think that really enjoy it. You know? It's like, I think that will help broaden me somewhat. Yeah, my family story. My brother right now is about to have his first child, a daughter, and his wife's Korean, so they're in Korea right now. And so when people talk about the conflict in Korea, it's like, actually my brother and sister-in-law are there right now. So you know, it's like that. So hopefully we can further the introduction. What's interesting, this will be fun for you guys. So there are like three main pillars of politics, sort of, in terms of like the way you label candidates. So number one is bio, number two is charisma, number three is policy. And so I led with policy, and now we're trying to personalize me to a higher degree. And that's the project of this next leg, this next month or two. So if I fail in that, then, you know, it calls up and be like, hey, you know, it's not working. Like, you know, you gotta try and show different parts of yourself. And that then may include my family to a higher degree. I think that would help a lot. Bradley.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm curious how you think about scaling out the campaign. So a ground game in some of these early states is so huge, and I know that New Hampshire is, you know, probably the strongest area right now. But how do you think about scaling out the campaign, getting that strong ground game, getting enthusiasm, driving people out to get you out there? Because I think that's going to be key to this.
Yeah, so we just started having ground canvassing teams in New Hampshire. And people showed up from Maine and Massachusetts and Connecticut to show up and knock on doors in New Hampshire, and they're going to do that every weekend from now until voting starts in February. So if you know people in Iowa, we're heading on Thursday for the 17th time. New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada are the first 4 states. So those states are pivotal, so if you know people there and want to activate them, or even if at some point you want to take a trip to any of those states. And the other thing that we can do immediately is phone bank, which is call people in those states and then have conversations with them. They're actually eager to talk to you, and they'll have genuine conversations with you. It's not like, frankly, like some of you would respond if you get a phone call. But
Yeah.
they actually want to talk to people, want to talk politics, will have like a genuine conversation with you, can be persuaded. And it's more fun than you think. Like, I know for many of you, be like, oh, like, I love Yang, but phone banking, like, but if you phone bank, just try it once and see how it is, because it's more fun than you think. Like, people will pick up the phone and have conversations.
And just to push back on that a little bit, I think some of it too is about the relationships, right? Because, you know, and I know that you've been building with like Steve in New Hampshire and stuff like that, but like, how are you being received with the local kind of, you know, Democrats, right? Like the people that kind of bless candidates in a way.
Yeah. So the Steve that Bradley's talking about is Steve Marchand, who ran for governor in New Hampshire in 2018 and has endorsed me and now works in the campaign. And people love Steve. And so we went to half a dozen different Democratic chairs. And they've said flat out, it's like, because Steve's endorsing you, I'm now going to listen to you and see what I think. And then I would speak to them, and then afterwards they'd go to Steve and be like, I get it. Like, I see why you're endorsing Andrew. So that's happened in New Hampshire to a very high level. In Iowa, it's starting to happen more and more. I spent enough time in Iowa where a lot of people, frankly, I think their read on me was like, I like him, he's smart, he's interesting, like, let's see how it develops. And then as the campaign gets stronger, then they're very, very open to revisit. So as one sign of that, I'm one of like the last candidates to speak at this Iowa Wingding on Friday. So I think 19 candidates are speaking, and it's like the last 3 are like me, Bernie, and Elizabeth Warren.
Wow.
Biden, sorry. Me, Biden, and Elizabeth Warren, is that the last 3? So those are the last 3. I've spent time in Iowa and New Hampshire to a significant degree. South Carolina, we're just starting to ramp up, and the message is very strong in South Carolina. And then Nevada also, I think we're going to do well. We're polling at 3% before I even got there. And you know who's getting their jobs automated away? People in freaking Vegas. I don't know if you saw that stuff. Like, they automated away all the bartenders in MGM. You think that stuff's a joke, but like, you go, they all have robot bartenders in MGM. That's like hundreds of people who work in that industry. Nevada is actually #1 in jobs that are subject to automation, because if you think about the composition of those jobs, it's a lot of like dealers, you know, some of that stuff, like bartenders, a lot of the hospitality. A lot of it also is like shipping and call centers. Like, so Nevada, the message is very powerful. How about a lady? I feel like I've gone a little guy heavy. It's like, oh yeah, sure thing, Crystal.
So part of your message is $12,000 isn't enough to live off of, and that retraining won't work for when people lose their jobs to automation. So you seem to be the only candidate getting the question, so what are these people supposed to do? So, you know, in the past the answer's been, don't worry about it, your jobs are coming back. So what is the answer? Or what is sort of the message?
What's the vision? What's the vision for what the heck Americans are going to do? So one of the things we talk about is that if you look at $12,000 per individual in a town of 100,000 people, like that would be tens of millions of dollars per month in that community. And so it's not $12,000 in isolation. It's like, oh, I've got my 12,000. It's that community with the nonprofits having much more in the way of resources, with the businesses having much more in the way of consumer demand and thus a need to hire. You end up building a different form of regional economy based upon the $12,000 multiplied times the number of people. And you'd also see a massive uptick in entrepreneurship, arts, creativity, volunteerism, like all the positive things. That's the transitional step. It's not going to... I think I saw the math out. No. So the hope is you can end up building a whole ladder of opportunities in a community that would be accessible to people that live there. And if someone takes like a steep drop, let's say they're a truck driver and it's going to be extreme, at least it's not going to be existential in the same way it would if they were going from 46,000 to 0. Yes?
So one of the things that you talk about is changing the mindset from like scarcity to abundance, which I think is actually really hard to do, and I don't think most Americans really feel
Stand
that
that
way.
way, no. It's true.
Do you have a short, pithy way to get that across? To make people understand why that mindset, just the mindset change, will allow some of these like policies that you're hoping to enact one day to actually flourish?
I think probably the pithiest way I've said it is trying to get the boot off of people's throats. Because that's the mindset of scarcity that dominates most Americans' day-to-day lives. And I think if you were to talk to an American about a mindset of abundance, they might not really know what that means in the same way. Because, again, 78% are living paycheck to paycheck, can't afford a $500 bill. And so if you say, hey, abundance,
Like, no, that does not resonate.
I don't know what that
Yeah.
word is.
a neuroscientist said to me that the enemy of this campaign is the human mind. I know, it's tough. But what he meant by that is that we're actually programmed for resource scarcity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's served us as a species very, very well for a long time. But collectively, a resource scarcity mindset is going to be really problematic right now, because if everyone's like, oh, if you get it, then we don't have enough, and then like, I don't get it, you're not like me. I mean, you can kind of see that that's what's happening in the US. And so that's the switch we have to flip. And I'm not sure if get the boot off of people's throats is like the most effective way to communicate it.
Right.
But when the light bulb goes off for someone, like they understand it in a different way. And it happened. This is not to talk about her too much, but like I saw the light bulb go off for Whoopi Goldberg when I was with her, like at the View, and then she was like, "What was her direct quote? I really, really like you, Andrew." And she seemed really surprised by it. And I was like, "Thanks, Whoopi. I really like you too." So yeah. So she direct messaged me today and being like, "Hey, like we got to make this dividend happen." Like, it's like, and she calls us like the American tribe. Then Indian tribes do it. Like, are we not a tribe? So like I'm not sure what connections work for different people.
Right.
But when someone gets it, then they get it, and then it's there to stay. All right, last question. You've been persistent, yes.
So Andrew, what's your strategy? What's your game plan for beating Donald Trump? Like, how do you deal with the vitriol when he calls you names on the debate? He doesn't want to debate strategy and policy with you, but he's going to call you names, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
So right now the goal is to win the Democratic primary. But if you play this out, like you imagine what it would take for me to win the Democratic primary. Like what happens? Then people start realizing that we can vote ourselves a dividend of $1,000 a month, and that it's like very, very doable and powerful. That starts sweeping the country. The Democrats look around at the other candidates and decide, you know what, we're going to take a bet on Yang. And also that the American people, millions of Americans, have a sense of me as an individual in a way that they like and trust me. They think I'm moral, think I'm a good family man, that there's like, these are all things that would have to happen for me to beat Donald Trump. And then if it's me against Trump, there are people in Iowa who said, I would love to see you debate Donald Trump because you destroy him. Now, I agree with you, it's not a rational thing. But that joke I told at the opening of the last debate, it's like the opposite of Donald Trump's an Asian man who likes math. It's like, if you can imagine the contrast between Donald Trump being like, Comrade Yang, like, go back to China. That was my shot at it. And then I'd be there, and I'm like very hard to offend and very logical, instead of being like, you're divisive. Like I'd be like, look, Donald, you're like a big puffed up joke. It's like just get out of the way so we can start solving some problems. It'd just be like a different form. It's like, I'm not a typical politician, and a lot of his best attacks work on politicians. We'd be like, you're crooked Hillary, you're bought and sold, like you're part of like drain. None of that shit works on me. I'm like his mirror image in a particular way. He even said something at a rally in West Virginia where he said, the only thing I worry about is some new person coming out of nowhere. Because he can't paint me with the same brush that he can paint everyone else. So in order for me to get to a point where I'm running against Donald Trump, I become like this symbol of abundance and problem solving and a new approach, and like all these things have to happen. And then if all these things happen, then we would beat Donald Trump very, very soundly. And I'm already only one of 2 candidates that double-digit Trump voters said that they would vote for.
Wow.
Like it's Bernie Sanders and me are the only 2 candidates that double-digit Trump voters said. So I can win. We can win. Thank you, Yang.
Let's give it up for our next president of the United States, Andrew Yang. I also know many of you have maxed out already, but if you haven't, please consider giving more Andrew Yang's campaign is putting on ads on TV, and we really need those on TV so people understand this platform and what Andrew stands for. So please do that. Thank you so much for coming.
And we have math hats and books over in that corner for everybody, and then there's also a computer if you're wanting to donate more. We would love everybody's support.
And pens.
And pens, yeah,
and bumper stickers.
Bumper stickers are huge. Put it on
Thank
your
you,
car.
everybody.